Hello fellow Earthlings, it's Libs, and today I'm going through and ranking every single book I read in 2021. So grab yourself a cup of tea, because this is going to be a long one. Okay, I have written notes for this video because there are so many books I need to talk about. Okay, I think I'll start with reading stats. So, this year I read 64 books in total and 21,006 pages. The majority of the books I read were reflective and emotional, split pretty evenly between medium and slow-paced books. The majority were under 300 pages. Most of the books I read were fiction. The most popular genres I read were historical, contemporary, literary, fantasy, and classics. And my most read authors were Ali Smith, Audre Lorde, Daphne du Maurier, Erin Morgenstern, Taylor Jenkins Reid, and Rick Riordan. For this video, I'm not going to talk about all 64 books I read, more because some of them were textbooks or books I read to study, or books that I didn't read necessarily just to enjoy them. I read to learn something from them. So they're books I'm not going to mention in this video just because I don't think I would be able to rate them fairly. Particularly textbooks, they would probably just be at the bottom of the list because they're textbooks. I'll do my disclaimer. I'm going to start from my least favourite book and work my way up to my favourite book. You probably aren't going to agree with me on all of these because you might love some books I despised and I might like some books you despised. Love and peace, bros. So, I'll start with the two books I DNF'd this year. I started reading Crime and Punishment for a video where I was going to be reading Timothée Chalamet's favourite books, and I got 30% into this book and decided the whole video concept was stupid, and I dropped it because I could not finish this book. The other one is one I actually DNF'd yesterday, and that's Lanny by Max Porter. I can't even tell you what this book was about. I think I got 40% of the way through and then someone killed a hedgehog, and I've never noped out of a book faster. I could not deal with that. Not reading that book. Okay, I'll kind of explain my rating system before I talk about the books. So 1 stars are typically books that I would have DNF'd if I wasn't reading them for a video and I forced myself to get through them, but I really didn't like them and I would have stopped reading. 2-star books are pretty similar to my 1-star books. It's just I can find a few more things to say about them that make them not absolutely atrocious to me. My 2.5-star books are still books I didn't really like, but I think other people might enjoy them, and they've got a few good things, few bad things, more of a mixed bag, but again, not really books I'd recommend. 3-star is the books that, while I liked them, I don't find them to be particularly special or memorable in any real way. They're just books that I think some people might really like, but I just wish there was something to give them a little bit more oomph. Do not ask me why I rate some books 3.5 stars. I just think they're a little bit better than a 3, but not quite good enough to be a 4. 4-star books are ones that I genuinely really liked and would recommend, but they might just have a few faults that don't make them 5-star books. My 4.5s are books that I really, really liked. They're almost 5 stars, but they're not going to be all-time favourite books for me. There's just something not quite there. So close, but not quite. And then 5-star books are books I absolutely loved, don't really have anything to critique about them. Okay, so Let's start with my least favourite book. We'll officially start with my least favourite book of the year. And this is the only 1 star I have. The Last by Hannah Jameson. This is a murder mystery set during the nuclear apocalypse. It wants to be clever and speak on social issues, but the characters are unlikable and the structure was weak and nothing makes sense. Now moving on to my 2 stars. The Binding by Bridget Collins. A historical fantasy novel about magical, dangerous books that's divided into 3 parts. The characters are stupid, and the book needs every trigger warning under the sun. Sorcerer to the Crown by Zencho. Another historical fantasy, this time set during the Regency era, where women aren't meant to be sorcerers and magic is disappearing from England. Everything in this book was super over the top and dramatic. It just was not for me. My 2.5 stars. Far from the Madding Crowd by Thomas Hardy. A classic novel about a young woman who inherits a farm during a time when women weren't considered capable of doing such work, and her 3 suitors. While the book had some interesting things to say, it was slow and my dyslexic brain genuinely couldn't figure out some of the passages. The Little White Horse by Elizabeth Gouge. This is the point where I'm going to apologise for if I can't pronounce the names of authors. This is a children's fantasy novel from the 40s about a young orphan girl who goes to live with her uncle in this mysterious place that her family's owned for generations. While it's got some cute magical elements, it's got some really creepy religious overtones I did not like and made the book pretty unreadable for me. Hear the Wind Sing by Haruki Murakami. A short novella translated by Alfred Birnbaum. It's the story of a college student who comes home for the holidays, and the relationship he starts with a young woman who's missing a finger, and him hanging out with his best friend known as the Rat. It was not a particularly memorable book, and nothing really happened. The Many by Will Menyur. A literary fiction novel about a man who moves to a grieving town on the Cornish coast where he attempts to put his life back together. It's a surrealist exploration of grief that had many interesting elements but was also confusing as all hell. Okay, let's move on to the 3-star books. This is Morning Sunshine or Sunshine Morning Tea, and it's just a bit, I don't know, it's very just normal black tea. Dark as Last Night by Tony Birch. A short story collection about young people living in Australia. I barely remember it. It was not remarkable in any way. Bloodchild by Octavia E. Butler, which is a short story about monsters who need humans to help them procreate. It's really gory and weird. Orlando by Virginia Woolf. A classic novel about a man from the Elizabethan age who never gets old and one day magically turns into a woman. It has some beautiful prose, but it goes on, and it's not nearly as progressive as I had it kind of sold to me as. The Sun and Her Stars by Rupi Kaur. A poetry collection that explores the stages of grief after a relationship breakdown and themes of sexual assault. I like the longer poems, but The shorter ones really just felt like little statements instead of poetry, and it wasn't really for me. There Was Still Love by Favel Paret. A historical generational story set in Prague during 1938, Prague in 1980, and Melbourne in 1980. I don't remember this book really at all. I don't think I really remembered what the book was while I was reading it. It was just so mediocre. But I liked, the theme that love could be found even in these difficult times and the family relationships, but it just wasn't very exciting or intriguing or anything like that. The Dating Plan by Sarah Desai. A contemporary romance between a not like other girls character and a guy who didn't show up to take her to her senior prom. I enjoyed how important the families and the found family themes were in this book, but the romance was just so not really a thing, and it wasn't realistic, and I don't know why the characters would just start listing off the things they liked about each other in these really weird ways that just are not how people talk. I've never gone to my partner and gone, here are all the things I like about you, and then listed off 10 things. I didn't like that. The Lost Girls of Paris by Pam Genov. A historical fiction story about female radio operators who were working in France during the Second World War. It's kind of a mystery that's kind of inspired by real events, but also just really blandly written and didn't really make me excited. The most interesting character wasn't one of the three that the book focused on, so that was disappointing. I feel like I'm reading these out like I'm doing the Oscar nominations or something. Okay. I can talk like a normal person. The Stylist Sea by Erin Morgenstern. A fantasy novel about a college student who finds a story about him in a mysterious book and goes on an adventure to learn the truth. I love the atmosphere in this book and the mystery at the start. I just find with Erin Morgenstern's books that she can't quite figure out how to wrap up her stories, so the final third was all over the place and I didn't like it, and then couldn't really figure out what the point of the book was. I loved the Netflix show, so I wanted to read the book, but the show is just a lot better than the book was. I think don't really bother with the book. It's just, it drags a bit, and there's some scenes that did not need to happen, that were very uncomfortable, that I was not prepared for. Whew. Okay, now moving on to the 3.5 stars. A mystery thriller where gentrification is taken to the extreme in Brooklyn. I loved the concept of this book, and while I do think in some points it was really cool to hear from two different characters, having that dual perspective took away some of the mystery, because you knew what both characters were thinking and were doing, so the mistrust that was written into the book doesn't make sense. And then I found at the end the villains were just cartoonishly evil, and while I kind of get it, I also really wish there'd just been a little bit more nuance there or something. The Collected Dorothy Parker by Dorothy Parker. I am reading, I read this for a video that's coming out soon. If you've watched the one Vlogmas I did, you will have heard about this. I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's a collection of short stories, poems, and reviews that Dorothy Parker wrote. I liked the poetry, thought her short stories were a bit and then really, really liked the reviews. The Sea by Iris Murdoch. The diary of a gentleman who has retired to the seaside, where he runs into an old flame and develops an obsession with her. This is a very slow book, but it does a great job at exploring toxic masculinity and this guy who just has no concept of the fact that not everyone feels the way he feels and not everyone wants what he wants. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. A classic science fiction novel about Dr. Frankenstein and the monster he creates. I can see why this book has been so popular for 2 centuries. While I thought it was very cool, there were just bits that were stretched out longer than they needed to be, and then bits that weren't fleshed out enough at all for me. So it was a bit of a mixed bag. Jamaica Inn by Daphne du Maurier. The story of a young woman who goes to live with her uncle and aunt on the moors, only to discover that her uncle's criminal activity has shattered the spirits of all who surround him. I loved the setup for this book. I loved the atmosphere. It was really, really great. The only thing that let this book down was the ending. So there's a twist on a twist, and I saw the first twist coming and I was okay with that. And then the second twist was just weird and a bit stupid and a bit stereotypy, so I didn't love it. Then we'll get to 4 stars. You'll get a bit more positivity from me now. Winter by Ali Smith. The second book in the seasonal quartet. This one focuses on immigration and activism. I liked this book a lot, but I think it's probably the weakest of the seasonal quartet. I just don't think it was as memorable. Mrs. March by Virginia Fieto. The story of a woman who starts questioning everything after she hears that an awful character in her husband's latest book resembles her. This book did such a great job at exploring our main character's mindset and showing her fears and insecurities as these weird, horror-y things that are happening around her. It's not really very horror-y, but there's a few elements. It's really, really cool, but I did find that the ending was just a little bit too predictable for me, and that some of the little gory bits were just overly gratuitous for what it was. The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. I'm sorry, I've butchered that. I know I've butchered that. The heartbreaking tale of betrayal and friendship that stretches from Afghanistan to America. This is a really great book about redemption, but I didn't realize how many trigger warnings this book needed, because I've heard just so many people read it in high school, or it was an assigned book in high school, and I wasn't prepared for some of the very graphic scenes that happen. And so I'm not sure I'd recommend this book to everyone, but it is a good book if you can handle it. No One is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. A literary novel split into 2 halves. One part being part of the social media void, and the other focusing on tragic events that are kept off social media. I don't really know how I feel about this one. I think it was very clever and did some interesting things, which is why I gave it 4 stars, but I don't think it had the emotional impact it wanted to have on me, so I don't know. Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. a mysterious fantasy novel about a man who has lived in a giant house full of statues for as long as he can remember, where only one other person occasionally resides. The first 60 or so pages of this book were so boring and dull that I kind of gave up on this book for a while, but then I picked it back up, and after that point the story really starts to improve, the pace gets a lot better, the mystery starts to unfold. It's really good from that point on, but you do have to struggle through that first 60 pages. The Princess Bride by William Goldman. An adventure romance that inspired one of my favourite films of all time. If you like the film is better. The film is obviously better. I think doing a story inside a story works so well in that context, but in the book it's a different story within a story setup, and I didn't like it. I think it aged a lot, it didn't age as well. There's definitely a few moments where it helps flesh out the movie in interesting ways, but I enjoyed it, but it's probably not for everyone, and the film is definitely better. Okay, I'm putting these two together because I can't rate one above the other, and that is Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief and the Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan. I'm not going to talk about this because everyone knows what Percy Jackson's about. I'm hoping to finish the series next year. She is Haunted by Paige Clarke. A short story collection focusing on themes of loss, being Chinese Australian, and climate change. All the stories were well crafted and unique, although I did have to skip the one about the dog, and that is the death of some animals. This Green and Pleasant Land by Aisha Malik. A contemporary story set in the English countryside and focusing on a man who promised his mother that he would build a mosque in the village. I really like that this book focused on the point of view of the man's family, but also the village, and kind of explores how there's so much else going on in the village, but the village focuses on its idea of its Englishness and its own mythology, and it's just a very interesting read. I thought I was going to like it more than I did, just because I didn't rate it quite as high, mainly just because I found the writing to be not quite as beautiful and juicy as I wanted it to be. The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. A historical fantasy about two young people in a magic competition where they don't know the rules or what they're fighting for. I like this book so much more than I liked The Stylist Sea. I just think while I liked the setup for The Stylist Sea more, I think this book did a far better job at keeping contained to what it wanted to be and crafting a better overall story. Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. The story of Amara, a young woman who one night is accused of kidnapping the white child she babysits. It explores race and what it feels like to be surrounded by people who assume they know what is best for you. Spring by Ali Smith. The third book in the seasonal quartet. This one focuses on immigration and delves into detention centres. Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. A classic children's novel about the four March sisters growing up in Massachusetts during the Civil War. I loved this. I thought it was so sweet and charming. I love the film that Greta Gerwig directed, so that really made me want to read the book. I just think that sometimes it got a little overly preachy, and I didn't love those parts of the book. Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier. A historical adventure romance featuring pirates and biting commentary about the role of women in society. This was the first book I read this year, and it was just so fun. I know it's not everyone's favourite du Maurier, but I think it's just so fun, and it does so much more than just be a romantic pirate romp. The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. The story of twins who come from a town where everyone is white passing. They run away and choose vastly different life paths, but when their daughters meet, the truth will come out. I loved this book. It had such great representation that I wasn't expecting to come out of this book. And it did a really great job at trying to explore the twin sisters and why they chose such different life paths and didn't communicate those life paths to each other. The only thing letting it down is one of the daughters wasn't explored. Like, her story wasn't explored to the same extent as the other sister. The other sister's daughter, her cousin. And I just wish they'd explored her story a little bit more. Because she's clearly damaged from the lies that she's been told. And I just, think she deserved a little bit more story time. Swing Time by Zadie Smith. I don't know how to describe this book. It's about race, class, feminism, dance, and media, and that's pretty much all you really want to know going in. It plays with time a lot, so you can get a bit confusing about where in the timeline everything is, but I really enjoyed it. The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. Did I just say F. Scott's? F. Scott Fitzgerald. Turns out, F. Scott Fitzgerald is actually a pretty decent writer. Who would have seen that coming? Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. A brilliant short story collection with horror elements focusing on themes of feminism, motherhood, plague, and surviving violence. I don't normally love short story collections, but this one really, really impressed me. I think it did a great job at having different stories of different lengths, exploring the themes through really unique ways. I really enjoyed it. Now we'll move on to the 4.5 stars. Fire, Flood, Plague, which is a collection of essays by Australian writers talking about what it was like to live in Australia during 2020 when there was the fire, the flood, and then the plague. Okay, I've got both Autumn and Summer by Ali Smith, which are the beginning and the end of the seasonal quartet. I can't really explain these books, but they're fantastic and please read them. The Housekeeper and the Professor by Yoko Ogawa. The story of a woman who takes care of an elderly maths professor who has a brain injury and can only remember 80-minute increments. This is such a charming book. I loved the relationship between the housekeeper's son and the professor and how everyone bonds through math. The first sort of third, there is a lot of math in the book, and that kind of put me off because I don't understand a thing about math, but it was really charming to see how much the characters cared or learnt to care, and it was just a really sweet book that really made me feel. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo by Taylor Jenkins Reid, which is an interview between an up-and-coming journalist and a very famous actress who never does interviews. I finally started reading Taylor Jenkins Reid this year. I'm so glad I did. I loved this book. I thought it was fantastic. I really enjoyed how all the characters kind of were a mixed bag of doing good things and terrible things. And I can't explain it. I can't explain to you how great this book is. It's clearly inspired a little bit by like Liz Taylor and Rita Hayworth and possibly Katharine Hepburn. It's really, really cool. If you're into old Hollywood, you'll probably really enjoy this book. We are now up to the top 10. Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro, a sci-fi novel about an artificial friend who is solar powered and is taking care of a little girl. This was such a unique book. I'd never read Kazuo Ishiguro before this book. It explores so many themes of like technology, environmentalism, gene editing. It was just fantastic. It did so much in such a short amount of time, and I recommend this book to pretty much everyone. It's brilliant. Then we have the 5 stars. If you've watched my favourite books of 2021 video, I've talked about all of these books here, but I didn't rank them. So I'm not going to give you a synopsis of any of these books, except maybe number 1, just so you know why it's number 1. But I will link the video up here. Please watch it. You can learn all about these books. Zammy, A New Spelling of My Name by Audre Lorde. Mythos by Stephen Fry. The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. Lullaby by Leila Slimani. Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. Circe by Madeline Miller. The Revolt by Clara Dumont-Monod. And Who Gets to Be Smart by Brie Lee. This book ended up being my favourite because it's the one I think I've talked to people about in real life the most. It focuses on, it's a non-fiction book focused mainly on Australia, looking at the Rhodes Scholars and the Ramsay Centre and different structures in place in Australia that allow some people to get an education and then prevents others from having those same opportunities. It was such an interesting book. It goes into so many places that you wouldn't expect. I thought it was fantastic. Definitely my favourite book of the year. That was exhausting. I need to eat something now. I've been talking for ages. I think my reading goal for next year is going to be reading 70 books. I made my goal this year 52, and since I got over that, particularly in the second half of the year, I was reading a lot more after I discovered the joy of audiobooks. So I think, I'm going to up my reading goal for next year, but I won't up it too much because I still have uni to do. Okay, well, let me know what your favourite books of the year were down below. I'm exhausted. Let me know down below. Hopefully by the time this goes up, I will have written a blog post talking about my favourite books that were released this year, and I will link that down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.